Well, joining me in our Washington studio for more in-depth analysis on the situation in Syria, especially Idlib province, is Aykan Erdemir. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He's also a former Turkish parliament member. Aykan, welcome to the program. Well, we heard what the UN says, that if nothing is done, if this full onslaught begins on Idlib, the worst civilian casualties in 21st century, a catastrophe waiting to happen. What is going to happen to all these civilians that are stuck in Idlib, among 3 million people there? Where are they going to go?
As you said earlier, half of these people have already been internally displaced peoples from elsewhere, and it seems that they will once again be pushed, but this time with the Turkish border closed, they don't have much option to go anywhere. So experts predict high civilian casualties in the days to come, and I think we will be on the verge of what the experts are saying, one of the worst catastrophes.
Are you getting a sense how this fight for Idlib province, how is it different from what we saw in Aleppo? How is it different from what we saw in Raqqa or Eastern Ghouta?
In earlier fighting, there were humanitarian corridors, there was still some space to fall back on, but this time, Idlib, a small enclave with over 3 million civilians and up to 100,000 jihadist fighters, people are really stuck in between, Turkey's security border and the regime forces, and I think this is where now the history of the 21st century will be written.
What came of the summit in Iran, in Iranian capital in Tehran? You had leaders of Turkey, Russia, and Iran meeting to come up with some kind of solution. There was no ceasefire, even though Turkey was hoping for one. So very different strategies here. Iranians and Russians on one side, Turkey on the other side. What did that summit really accomplish?
Not much. The Trilateral summit brought together parties which are not necessarily on the same page. Turkey, right from the very start, has been looking for regime change in Syria, whereas Tehran and Moscow happen to be one of the strongest backers of the regime. And in Idlib, I think the Turkish government was hoping that there could be a pause to the regime attacks with Russian backing, which did not materialize. I think the Assad regime now feels stronger than ever. Russia is really not looking forward to stopping at this point. And I think Turkey is really worried that on top of the 3.5 million Syrian refugees who are already in Turkey, there might be another million coming Turkey's way. And this time around, that million might also include tens of thousands of seasoned jihadists, some of the Al-Qaeda-linked terrorists who might also cause havoc in Turkey itself.
But what about all those civilians, Aykan? Will Turkey open the border and perhaps initiate some kind of screening process for the mothers and children to let them in?
Now, I think this couldn't have come at a worse time. Turkey is going through one of the worst economic crises in its history. There is already a spike in anti-Syrian sentiment at home as Turkish citizens start seeing Syrian refugees as scapegoats. And the Turkish government, I think, is really not at a point where it can accept another million Syrian refugees. And with the EU already struggling with the rise in far-right anti-immigrant sentiment, this is really a terrible time to be a Syrian refugee looking for safe havens.
So basically you're saying they probably will not be let in Turkey.
I think that's what the Turkish government
would be saying then.
Say.
And what about the military implications beyond the region, Aykan?
Now, I think the key issue to watch is use of chemical weapons. Already the United States, as well as a number of EU countries, have made concrete threats against Damascus, saying, if you use chemical weapons, we will strike. But keep in mind, there are Russian forces. Keep in mind there are Iranian proxy forces. Keep in mind there are 12 Turkish observation posts in Idlib with over 1,000 Turkish soldiers. This is really a powder keg, and it can go off at any moment.
A complicated situation on the verge of a disaster. Aykan Erdemir, thank you, as always.
Thanks for having me.